If I've got a school, they're in the bottom 12%, that puts me on notice. Perhaps this private school may look good on the outside, but it's not so good on the inside, and not a good place maybe to send my children.
Let's just get right to some of our pre-taped interviews. So, like I said, we talked to Alabama State Senator Arthur Orr about his support for vouchers and loosening child labor regulations. It was a respectful conversation, obviously, but you know, what we wanted to do was very limited. We had 15 minutes, and it was a super hard stop. So unfortunately, we weren't able to go too deep into some things that we would have liked to. But you know, feel like it was a good interview, and we got some answers to questions that other folks, you know, I don't think have asked. So here is that clip of our conversation with Alabama State Senator Arthur Orr.
We'll go ahead and get started. I've just started recording, so I appreciate your time. We have with us Alabama State Senator Arthur Orr. He's very busy, and you know, I know that we're in the middle of the session, so only have a limited amount of time, and we wanted to ask you a couple of questions about some of the bills that we, you know, that we disagree with you about. But we don't want you or anybody else to think that, you know, we think that you're like the worst legislator out there, that you've done a lot of things that we really agree with, and that we really appreciate genuinely, like the removing the sales tax of menstrual products and baby products, your opposition to the construction of a quarry in Belmina in Limestone County, and perhaps even surprisingly, your support of a bill that would increase civil and criminal penalties for employers who violate child labor law. So just want to get that out of the way. We've talked about some of those before, and we'll continue to talk about that on our program. But we wanted to spend some of the time trying to get some answers on some of this other stuff. So wanted to start with the CHOOSE Act. That's a type of voucher programs. There have been a lot of states that have implemented something like this. This one would give parents $7,000 to go to a private school, homeschool parents $2,000, up to $4,000 if they have multiple kids, I think. And it phases in, and you're starting with children with special needs and poor children. And then after 2 years, it opens up to everyone. The pot of money starts at $100 million from the fiscal year 23's surplus. So could you tell us what happens after the expansion? After 2 years, once everybody is eligible, is there a cap, or is it just treated like a right?
So it's a little confusing. So couple things on that. The 500 special needs children get first access. I believe there was an amendment in the House that included a priority for children of veterans, active duty military, who live in school districts that are, I forget the terminology they used to be referred to as failing school districts. I forget the new nomenclature for that, but they would get a priority. Then you start at the lowest income levels and work upward based on income as far as eligibility. Then on the amount, even though the bill says at least 100 million, we are able to determine that amount in the annual appropriation process and in the budget. So if one year we wanted it to be 60 million, we can do that. It's not a requirement that we have to always do 100 million.
So each year you have to approve a new amount, and
Correct.
The default is zero. What would the default be?
Well,
if no anything is passed on that?
We have to appropriate the amount, and again, in the budget amount, in the budget process, according to the staffers, that is something, the barometer that we can go up or down on. There is a cap. You can't do more than 90%. If 90% of the money from the previous year is not utilized, you can't increase the amount. So that's something that was put on in the House.
Okay, so that's interesting. So this would not be like just a free for all. You have to set an amount, and then you can't, for that year, you can't go over that amount
Yeah,
in any given year.
the practical problem would be if you cut it in half, you may have children that have enrolled in this
Right.
school over there, and then now, based on their income, they're not going to be eligible, and so they would lose that $7,000 savings account for their
Yeah.
school that they're going to.
Recently, the state has determined that the revenue has not increased enough in the Education Trust Fund to cut the grocery sales tax by another percent. That's also been a phase in. And so why do legislators feel like we have enough money to direct $100 million towards a new school voucher program, but not enough money to further cut taxes on groceries?
Right. With the grocery tax, we put a proviso in that bill last year that said the second penny would fall if there were 3.5% year over year growth in the ETF. So the projections are that we won't hit the 3.5% growth year over year, and so that's the reason the second penny didn't drop off. But a 2%, 3%, call it what you will, is still several $100 million of growth that you would see in the budgets if that's the amount.
What's the problem that you feel like you're trying to address with the school voucher program?
Well, again, this was Governor Ivey's bill, and I was asked early in the process. You remember last year, we had a bill called the Price Act that had a sticker price of, my recollection, $500 to $600 million that gave me sincere heartburn, and I amended it heavily in committee and still wasn't comfortable with it. But I was asked last fall to come help Governor Ivey craft the current bill, and worked with her staff. And I will say this, the bill that it was introduced was very different from where the bill was when Chairman Garrett and myself entered the room and saw where they were headed. And because of a lot of feedback from both Chairman Garrett and myself, the bill came down substantially because I couldn't support something that I don't believe that we can afford. And so all that to say, I felt it important to be in the room helping craft something that I knew was coming and make it a manageable amount, as opposed to something that was not manageable and having a lot of disagreement later on down the road.
Okay.
So if I can jump in real quick, would it be fair to say that, some form of school choice legislation was bound to happen, and so you felt it best to kind of be involved as opposed to not being involved?
That's where I felt the wind blowing strongly. And again, there are some good points, some very good points about flexibility and choice, particularly those in marginal school districts, giving parents the ability. But at the same time, it's a balance, because we do not need to erode the credibility of our public schools, in my opinion.
So like we said at the beginning, we're not the first state to do this. And I'm interested in if you or some of the other legislators have really dug into the results, because some of these programs in other states are actually pretty old now, and there have been some pretty robust academic research done on them. And so I'm wondering if y'all have done any of that and what you found.
I have seen some. I can't recall it at present, but I have seen, positive results, and I think that's a lot of with statistics and data. Sometimes it can be manipulated by either side, who's for it, who's against it, and it depends on whose interpretation of the data you're looking at. But there's conflicting data out there, and I understand that.
Well, yeah,
Okay. So guys, I gotta move on. So if y'all got other questions, I'm glad to answer them. But I'm 6 minutes late for my call with the
Sure.
Tennessee attorney to talk about easements.
Well, I wanted to, I guess I wanted to share some of the stuff that we've seen that, the majority of these vouchers have been utilized by people who are already in private school. And one of the issues with their effectiveness is that the private schools that are actually good, they tend not to accept folks who make use of the vouchers. And so there are these schools that pop up that are not very good. And that's the ones that people who actually make use of these vouchers to move from public schools to private schools, that's where they actually end up going. And so because of that, from what we've seen, there's actually been a decrease in academic achievement.
One thing that we added was to require the participating private school to report its ranking, I'll call it, or percentile place for that particular school. They've got to report that to the Department of Revenue, and that will be reported to parents and whomever wants to see it. So if I've got a school that I'm sending my children to, for example, that's got a 10, they're in the bottom 12%, that puts me on notice. Perhaps this private school may look good on the outside, but it's not so good on the inside, and not a good place maybe to send my children.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
All right, so there you go. I had a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share with you as I'm listening to that interview again. Going back to the vouchers, his support for vouchers, I thought that it was interesting in his answer to the question that when I asked him what problem is he trying to solve by sponsoring this legislation, he was the one who brought the bill forward in the Senate. He was very clear to make sure that it was known that it was Kay Ivey's bill. It was apparently not his idea. And so when I asked him, what problem are you trying to solve? He didn't give me one. He didn't give me a problem that he was trying to solve. There was no affirmative case that he was making for school choice. And so it's interesting that this is the guy in the state Senate that is sponsoring this, and he is the head of all of the committees, the Education Budget Committee and all this stuff. Very powerful legislator. He's been in there a long time, so he's sponsoring this legislation. And there wasn't a single problem that he was trying to address. At first it was implicit, and then Adam made it explicit that he felt like vouchers were gonna pass this year. And so he wanted to go in there and try to mitigate damage. I think that's a really fascinating revelation. I think that's really fascinating and genuinely kind of newsworthy, that the sponsor of this legislation is not making an affirmative case for vouchers. Not making an affirmative case, not saying that there's some problem that we're solving here, just that there are some other people in his party who were going to do this regardless, and so he wanted to go in there and moderate it some. I think that's interesting. Also, when we asked about results, Alabama's not the first state to conceive of a voucher program, right? There are other states who've done this. Some of these other voucher programs are actually quite old now. So like I told him, there's been some robust research on it. And I thought it was also telling that, again, this is the guy, right? This is the guy. He can put the onus on Governor Kay Ivey if he wants, but he's the person bringing this. He has attached his name to it. He's the guy in the state Senate. When I asked him about, have you even done any research into like what the academic consensus on vouchers is? Have you even just read one of these studies? He couldn't. There were no numbers that came to his head. Right? He didn't have anything off the top of his head about the results of this huge policy change for education in the state of Alabama. Nothing. He knew nothing. Right? Other than what anybody can say about anything. You have conflicting data, and some people say something and some people say another thing, right? You can say that about literally any issue where there is a dispute about the facts, right? There's not a single issue that you can't say that about. Oh, well, there's conflicting data. There's conflicting data about literally anything. And so the fact that he doesn't even have in his back pocket the data that supports vouchers as he's pushing this in the legislature, I think that's also revealing, and I think that's also newsworthy. But it is a shame that he doesn't know the data, because the data does seem clear, even though yes, you can manipulate numbers and show that certain things, you can make the numbers say whatever you want, like he said, but clearly on a good faith reading, and you're trying to actually figure out what the results are. The results are not good for school voucher programs. They take money away from public schools because 70 to 90% of the people who use these vouchers were not in public schools before, right? And so one of the things that pro-voucher people will say is that, oh, look, what we do is we spend in Alabama $10,000 per pupil. I don't know if that's actually the number, but let's just say for the sake of argument. Well, vouchers, we're only given $7,000. So if a person leaves public schools and takes that $7,000 voucher, well, that's actually $3,000 that's unaccounted for, that's not tied to a head that the school system just gets for free. That's one of their arguments, right? And if that were the case, that 100% of the vouchers that were utilized in that way, people leaving public schools, then there would be some truth to that. Now, obviously, even if that's the case, there's complications there, right? Because there's you start losing, you lose enough kids, and then you're going to have to fire teachers, and there's problems there. And then also you have economies of scale, right? If you have a school of 100 people, then yes, it's true that it costs maybe $10,000 per head to teach them well. But if you start losing those, losing more of them, then the cost per head is actually going to go up, right? So obviously there's some problems even with that, but that's not the reality that we see with these voucher programs across the country. The thing that we see is actually that 70 to 90% of the people who use these vouchers were in private schools already. They were already outside of the public school system. So all of this money is just being drained from the public school system that was there before, right? So it's obviously a drain. And the results are not good. The results for the people who actually use it in the way that they present it, people who leave public schools and go to a private school, the results are very bad. Learning loss between 0.15 standard deviations and 0.5 standard deviations. And for those of you who've ever taken a statistics course, a standard deviation is actually very big. One standard deviation is huge. And just to put it in perspective, 0.15 standard deviations is approximately the learning loss that children in New Orleans schools faced after Hurricane Katrina and like the total destruction of the public school system in New Orleans. 0.5 standard deviations of learning loss is more than twice the learning loss that students experienced during the pandemic. Okay, so these are huge numbers, really unacceptable numbers, and it doesn't appear that he's aware of them, or he's aware of what a counter argument would be to that. So, revealing and I think newsworthy things there about his support for vouchers. I think that's really kind of fascinating. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project. And you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.